Hi guys, so I'm Malik.
And I'm Rukshila.
We are very excited to be here at Stax, the Colombo office. So we are here to interview Mr. Ruwindhu Peiris, the Managing Director at Stax, for our Business Leader Talk.
Before we begin the interview, let's watch a small clip about Stax and a small introductory video about Ruwindhu Peiris. The business leader we are meeting today is the young and dynamic Managing Director of Stax Incorporated, Ruwindhu Peiris. Prior to assuming office at Stax, Ruwindhu served as the Vice President and Head of Operations in Virtusa and held several other senior positions in operations, project management and systems engineering.
Ruwindhu is also the immediate past chairman of the Sri Lanka Association of Software and Services Companies, commonly known as SLASCOM. He is also a founding board member of the Lankan Angel Network, Sri Lanka's first alliance of angel investors, and has served as a director of the American Chamber of Commerce. Ruwindhu holds an MBA from the University of Edith Cowan and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering in Electrical and Computer Science from the Queen's University in Canada. Ruwindhu is a product of St. Peter's College and is married with 3 children.
Ruwindhu, thank you very much for taking time today. It's indeed a privilege to have got this opportunity to have this discussion with you. So we have some structured questions that we would like to ask you about your journey as a leader, your leadership style, and about some contemporary issues with regards to the industry that you are in.
Sure.
So to begin with, let me first ask, what would you say were the triggering events or that triggering event in your life which led you to become the leader that you are today?
Right, it's a loaded question. I think, so let me try and be as candid. I'll be honest, I think a lot of it really started with self-esteem, right? And if I go back, even as a kid, there's one recollection that I have, right? It's my mom always saying, and this is going to sound corny, but I'm going to share it because it has had an impact. And I think this is an important thing that I've taken with my kids, right? And I think we do enough of this. And I'm so grateful for my mother who did it. And every night she would say, hey, Magirattana Buddha, Kumare Rajek Peno. Right? So my young prince, you're going to be a king when you grow up. And I think most parents, they say it, but it was a consistent message every night. Right? She would just, and she genuinely felt that. And I think if I look back in terms of, as I think of my leadership style, it's just that ability to have belief in yourself, right? And I think a lot of that stems from very early on in your life. How much do you have, how much have you been equipped by those who love you, who you respect, who have instilled that kind of self-belief? So to me, I really look back and that kind of truly is a triggering point for me, right? So I've learned from that and made sure that I do this with my children. I have my own thing, right? So it's, and I make it a point, I unfortunately don't get to put them to bed every night, just with the work style and whatnot. It doesn't happen all the time, but every day I drop them off. I make time to go drop them off at school. And I've make sure I tell them, listen, be the best you can be, make yourself proud, and have fun, right? Because that's truly the 3 things that I think that I want them to do. But I tie that back. So anyway, to answer your question, I think that to me is a very key triggering point that kind of really, I feel, has given me that self-confidence.
So from the point you started as a fresher way back in 1998,
Sure.
You must have learned a lot of lessons about leadership through your own experience.
Yeah.
Can you point out one key lesson that you really believe in, which you frequently use when you are managing your troops?
Sure. Actually, there's 2, I think, that I've really kind of predicated myself on, right? One which I think I've tried to instill in a lot of people, and this came from Batusa, was, and I remember Chris, I think, really put this out when we talked about our values, and we spoke about leadership and this notion of servant leadership. And a lot of this phrase really stuck with me, right? The thing was, whenever something goes wrong, first look in the mirror, and whenever something good happens, make sure you look out the window, right? And it was simple enough, but very fundamental in terms of how I've looked at life, right? It's really been instrumental in terms of saying, hey, take accountability, right? When something goes wrong, there's always something that I could have done better. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean that you give a free pass. You do need to hold people accountable, right? So whether it be Malik or whether it be someone else that I'm working with, if something is amiss, you do give direct feedback, right? But in all of those, really kind of reflect back and say, hey, could I have done better? Did I hire the right person? Did I not do enough? If it's a bad hire, then it's still my job, right? If it was a good hire, but I didn't train enough, what could I have done differently, right? So really that perspective. But also I think, sometimes it's easy, right? All of us are ego-driven, and the more you grow, it's a lovely feeling, and you need that as a human being. But it's important to remind yourself that also, are you giving that out, right? So when success happens, how much of that are you actively making sure you're attributing back to those who have really been instrumental in making that happen, right? So that I think was a fundamental lesson. The second one, which I think has truly differentiated, was, and this came from, again, Batusa, but Keith in particular, Keith Moda, who was, I had the privilege of joining. I first joined him at KBSL, and then when he moved over to Batusa, I was picked as one of the few that joined him as he did the move. And I think one thing that I admired about him was just this uncanny ability to spot people and hire better than him. And he would say that, right? Even if you go back to KBSL, I remember he had hired Ramesh at the time, Shamuganathan, who's now the CIO of John Hughes overall. And in many ways, Ramesh was far more versatile in solutioning, in digital, had all of that. Most people would have thought that as a threat. And you'd see that. Early days of some of the other leaders, they would always hire someone who they felt were not ever going to be a threat to them, right? And then even within Virtusa, consistently it would be, many folk from, particularly in India, as we kind of grew the company, these are guys who are, leaders in companies that were 10 times the size of Virtusa. And we attracted, the COOs, the CXOs of those companies. And each one of them would come in with the view saying, oh, I'm going to clearly take over, Keith and Moda is going to be, I'm going to be the next big thing. And he would embrace it. And I think his view was that, all of us will rise to our incompetency. Right? You rise, and then at some point, either you choose not to grow more, or you truly are, that's your limit. So let it play out, right? But never fear that. And then I think his ability to, so I embrace that, I love that. So I've always tried to do that. I've made sure that when we build teams, as we kind of grow stuff, am I hiring someone who really complements me, who brings in something that I don't have at the table? So yeah, those two things.
So the next question. So they say that the human capital in a consultancy firm, and in short, any firm for that matter,
Sure.
Human capital is the most important resource.
Yep.
So in your view, how has Stacks capitalized on the human capital and ensured that they've hired some of the best talent out there?
Sure, yeah, absolutely right. I think it's a very important thing and very pertinent in today's day and age, right? And I'll share with you, I think, one thing that's interesting, right? And I shared this with a few of you guys earlier, but if you look at the ages, you go back a bit, right? So if you think of the agricultural age, when you first started, and that was the first innovation, right? This human's ability to say, hey, I don't have to walk around, I can actually plant something and make it for my own, was the biggest transformation and innovation for humankind that got us to where we are. And in that time, in the agricultural age, the differentiator of those who were the haves and the have-nots was those who had land. So if you own land, you own the right side of the fence. You did really well. You go into the industrial age, right? And at that point, if you hadn't converted land into capital, right? If you didn't have free capital to be able to buy machinery, buy steam, be able to be innovative, really be entrepreneurial, you didn't take off, right? So that kind of made a big shift, and people kind of moved on to those who were blessed with capital, who could access capital faster, did well in the industrial age. You now kind of go to the knowledge age, right? Which people think we are in, but I think in many ways we've actually surpassed from that. In the knowledge age, it was about digital. If you had access to digital, if you had access to internet, if you were able to be savvy with digital, if you could get information easier or better than someone else, you did well. And that all of us are blessed with that. If you look back, and that was a complete differentiator, right? Whether it be education, all that stuff. I think where we are right now actually is we've surpassed that. We're now actually in the imagination age, right? So knowledge age is behind us. Just having knowledge doesn't help. And with the imagination age, if you think of the differentiator, let me ask you, what do you think the differentiator is in the imagination age?
I think it's about having the will to do it, the initiative.
Absolutely. So it's called motivation. That's the differentiator, right? And there's one very distinct difference about that now. Compared to the other three, what's the difference?
I think you have the tools and the resources readily at your fingertips to be able to do what you want.
You're right. So the distinction of motivation compared to land, capital, and digital, it's an internal job. You can't. There's no one else to blame, right? In the other three, you could have always said, I wasn't born into inheritance, I was on the wrong side of it, I didn't get access to it. Motivation is only yourself to look at. Only you can bring that motivation to the table, right? So it's a double-edged sword. It's a phenomenal time because it truly is dependent on you, but it's also very scary because it's dependent on you. There's no one else, right? So you've got to be on top of that. And I share that because, to answer your question in terms of in the knowledge age and where we are right now, and I think what we try to do with Stacks is really be focused on that. How do we get people, so there are tons of smart people, they're brilliant, right? Shelf life for brilliance is very low now, right? What was brilliant yesterday is not going to be brilliant today because there's something newer, faster that has come up. So you've got to have this innate curiosity and wanting to do better. So for us, a lot of who we hire, who we nurture, how we model ourselves is around creating motivation, right? So a lot of that starts from us really having a purpose in what we do, right? Something that's very unique and kind of ties into who we are, right? And it has to talk to Kumundu and I fundamentally, right? It has to be from a leadership perspective, it has to be something that we embrace. It's got to be relevant to from those who we make money from, it's got to be relevant to the masses that we have. And it has to be relevant to the partners. So I truly believe our purpose statement, which we've kind of put out there, freedom to dream, power to make happen, right? That's simply what we live on. And you'll see that in all of us, right? So whether it be the choices that I've made, to Kumundu makes, to what you made, who we hire, people who decide to move on from Stacks, and we encourage that. We said, Mother, never let anyone else get in the way of your dream. Dream comes first. Really give yourself that freedom because life is too short. And I think that purpose and that sense of really inculcating that at the forefront has ensured that those who join us and who we've been privileged to kind of have part of our journey, whether it be for 6 months, whether it be for 10 years with some of the people that we've had, every moment counts because they be motivated, right? And I think that's the key, right? It's not about, as I said, the knowledge or digital or whatever. It's about are you self-motivated to really challenge yourself and do better the next day. So
Yeah, moving on to the more contemporary part of the interview. So recently Stacks launched lean implementation services and a few digital offerings as well.
yeah,
So what was your thinking behind the time being now
sure.
to launch such solutions? That's one part of the question.
Yeah.
And the other being, what sort of advice do you have for companies in Sri Lanka
Sure.
in terms of being more digital savvy and in terms of cutting down their overheads in the current economic landscape?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think, again, a lot of that stems from our dream, right? And if you speak to Kumundu and me, you'll find that what really drives us is this dream of making Sri Lanka the best it can be, right? We worked outside of Sri Lanka, we have citizenships in other countries. If we wanted, we could move, right? We've chosen to be in this country. While everyone else is looking to move out, we said we're going to be here. And then because we love it, and we want it for our children, right? So that fundamentally is what drives us. So in a lot of the work we do, I mean, about 80-90% of our work is still very much US-centric and global. We service the rest of the world. The work we do in Sri Lanka is phenomenally exciting to us. We're very proud about the work we've done, but we don't it doesn't cut the bills for us on a day-to-day basis, right? It's something we're very proud about. We'll put our best foot forward to it. But a lot of the stemming incentives for that is to make a better Sri Lanka, right? And in that context, I think when you look at, to answer your question of why introduce digital and lean, the problem statement for the country we are right now, we're just not productive. Our aspirations outweighs what we're willing to do. Fundamentally, that's what it is. Our bills are more than what we are creating, right? We need to get to export-led growth. And I think as we celebrate our corporate leaders, and I have a lot of respect to them, but again, to my earlier point, I think all of us need to look in the mirror and say, as corporate Sri Lanka, what could we have done better? And it's become a habit now, right? Even with the current context, we'll complain, we'll blame everyone else. The easiest is to blame the politicians, right? And say, oh my God, what to do? These bad, corrupt politicians. But I'd like to ask you, I mean, if you think of any emerging market, any other countries, ours are par for the course. I don't think we can claim to say we have worse politicians. Yeah. I mean, right? They are as bad as the rest. So, how is it that other nations, despite, in some cases, they're worse than this, right? I mean, but they've succeeded. They've done well. And that's because corporate sector, private sector, individuals have really taken on and said, I'm going to do stuff. And that's really the ask that we have, right? And there's a few companies that are doing that. If you take the industry in particular, the knowledge sector, the innovation sector, $1.2 billion of exports into the last 10 years. 200 million to 1.2 billion in 10 years. Phenomenal growth. Unbelievable, right? And very candidly, with actually no relative support from the government. So I bring that as an example, not to whine about it, but to kind of advocate, saying that, hey, a lot can be done if you just focus on yourself, right? And when I say that if you take the apparel industry or the tea industry in context, a lot of subsidies, a lot of focus, opening up places, giving free land, giving, duty-free imports. This industry's got nothing in that sense. But we delivered, right? Because of that innate ability to kind of focus on what's worthy and make happen. So that's really where we're coming from, right? And why digital and lean is because those two things are the enablers and the tools for corporate Sri Lanka to be able to get a lot more productive, to be able to go out of the Sri Lanka, right? We have to have our aspirations and dreams beyond the shores of Sri Lanka, right? This is a test bed. It's a phenomenal test bed. We have a great market base that lets you fail fast, fail cheap. You can try out services, you can try out products. The demographies are very similar to some of these large marketplaces that we have the privilege and some amazing FTAs already in place to go sell into, whether it be Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, which ironically don't talk to each other, but all three of them love us, right? We're not taking enough advantage of these, right? And I think for us, I think from contemporary and from a time being perspective, we felt that, hey, these are the two things that really are the enabling tools for companies and corporates to be able to kind of equip themselves to go after some of this stuff. I forget the second question you had.
That's around advice you have for companies in Sri Lanka.
Right, absolutely. So as you embrace digital, right? So let me ask you a question again. So what's scary about digital? If there's one thing that's scary about digital, what would that be?
I think it would be in terms of, can you keep up with the technology at the rate it's advancing?
Okay.
Constantly, like with all the technology that's coming out day in and day out.
Sure. So it could be daunting, it could be overwhelming. Yeah. That's a fear for sure. What is digital in the first place? If I asked you what, in the most simplest form, what's digital?
In its simplest form.
So, at the core of it, it's ones and zeros. It's binary. That's what digital is, right? And therein lies also one of the biggest fears for people. We love grey. As humans, and particularly in Sri Lanka corporate life, not knowing yes or no, good or bad, right? And being able to live in the grey gives a lot of protection. It gives a lot of anonymity, gives a lot of ability to kind of create fact and not perform. So, therein is actually some of the biggest resistance to digital. Because digital will tell you yes or no. Data doesn't lie. And that's a very scary proposition. So it takes a lot of courage. It's going to take a lot of conviction, grit, wanting to push through for companies to really embrace this. And that's a challenge, right? The good news, I think, with a lot of the clients that we've worked with, I think that's emanating, right? We're at a very interesting juncture. You take, particularly family businesses, right? I mean, the economy is run, 80% of the economy is run on family businesses, right? And that's a great thing, because family businesses have the distinction of there being a soul, there's heart, right? Beyond just making money. And I think a lot of people will talk about family business being tough because it's messy, it's, there's older generation, new generation. But I think if, as Sri Lanka, if we can get this right and really enable our family businesses to surpass the rest of the region, that's our ticket out, right? And then I've honestly been quite pleasantly surprised and encouraged with some of the returning second, third generation. And this, if there was ever a silver lining on the 30-year prolonged war that we had, I think is that, right? To some extent is that during that period, most of the family businesses sent their kids out of the country. So they got exposed, they got taught outside, right? I had an amazing chat with a kid, I won't mention the name of the company, but he was in US, and what did that do, right? It gave humility, it gave the fact that you need to work for the money you make, you weren't entitled, right? Because unfortunately in Sri Lanka, if you grow up with money, it's your downfall. You get the Range Rover, you got the house, you got all the stuff coming your way, you don't have hunger. For the family businesses that send their kids out at the time, and I don't think they would have had it not been for the war in the situation, right? So circumstances forced them that to happen. They got equipped with just this notion of, if nothing else, no entitlement, right? You've got to work for what you have. And they saw that, hey, you know what, some of the most amazing people who are, wealth is a consequence, not the end destination, right? And that understanding, as I speak to some of these leaders who have returned, the second, third generation, young kids, these are in their early 20s, that 22 to 30, that's your most amazing time. And as I speak to some of these people who are now starting to take the helm of these family companies, it's very encouraging to see that, hey, they've come back with that exposure, they come back with the connections, they come back with the conviction. That, I feel, is really going to take us forward, right? They have the guts, they're going to make it happen. So, anyway.
Ruwindhu, management consultancy is relatively a new idea to the Sri Lankan market.
Sure.
As we speak, we don't see most of the companies making use of such consultancy services.
Right.
Tell us how you have led steps to kind of change this mindset in the business leaders in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, you're right. I think and a good reflection of the fact is that we've been in Sri Lanka for 12 years, but a lot of our local work has taken off essentially in the last 3 to 4 years, right? And because we did try earlier, but timing wasn't right. It didn't make sense. The value prop, the opportunity cost for us as a company was far greater, trying to kind of knock down doors and kind of make that. So, as I said, to the earlier point that I made, I think the timing worked out where the war ended. A lot of those young kids started returning. They had the battles with their families, and then finally they said, no, Dad, let's focus on what we're good at. There are experts who know more than us. Let's bring them in. So that timing helped. I think that, so from an economy perspective and the timing, as I said, that worked in our favor. I genuinely feel for Stacks, what differentiates us and what has made the conversation easier to kind of really take people in that journey is the mere fact that really our view, and my personal view as well, is that you really are only as good as your client. That's the reality in life, right? Humans by nature will step up to, you're going to do as much as you have, you will do as much as you have to do, right? When you work for the world's most demanding clients, right? And we've blessed as a company to have, had the opportunity to work for 50% of the world's largest private equity firms, right? So when you work for private equity firms that are the top of the game, that's even better than working with the top Fortune 500, because they are constantly pushing the angle of buying into the next wave of companies. Because what in today's day and age of exponential, what's happened is that the companies at the top of their game are very susceptible for failure. When you work for private equity, their whole goal is to look at the next big thing, right? So we, in our services, helping them find what the next best thing is and giving them advice in terms of investing into those. And once they made investment in those portfolio companies, helping them really derive and chase value, right? So when you come from that heritage and when we are forced to step up on a daily basis to that high bar that keeps changing on a daily basis, you can't help but be amazing at what you do, right? And I think in that sense, being a conduit of that and being able to parlay that and contextualize it in a local context. Now, not all of those stuff are relevant to Sri Lanka, but a lot of them are, right? And we as a country like to feel, digital is a classic example, right? So people say, you go back 5 years ago, Lanka, digital, will that ever work? Yeah, this is a developing country. Now you tell me, with Pick Me, what's that demography? The whole lifestyle has changed of a demography that we completely misread. And they adopted to technology far faster than the so-called sophisticated Colombo, right? Their whole livelihood is bent upon navigating an app and making the livelihood on that. They figured out how to do that. So we've stayed away from these things traditionally because of island mentality, I think. So coming back to my point, I think the fact that we've exposed to that and are based in Sri Lanka and are able to kind of know how best to contextualize and implement it, I think has truly helped us differentiate in this consulting space. Because you're right, I think, consulting is a tough thing, right? You kind of have to, in many ways, you're a therapist, right? You're coming into a situation and you are entrusted with some of the most intimate, daunting, scary, opportunistic ideas. You can't take that lightly, right? And I think we go into it with that understanding of we are privileged and entrusted with that information, and then you got to be mature in terms of how you handle that. And I think for us, as I said, that balance of being forced to be the best at what we do on a daily basis by working for the global companies, but also being grounded here and knowing the realities, right? That's really helped us, right? In comparison to our competition, if you think of those who are in the region, who come in as a fly-by-night, right? So they'll come in, whether it be some of the big names who are based outside of Colombo. They'll have the credentials, but when they come in and they do work, they aren't relevant. They don't know the realities of it. And I think that's helped us good.
I think now it's time for us to learn some techniques from you. So you seem to come off as a person who has a purpose larger than life. Apart from being this dynamic leader for this organization, you hold office in prestigious organizations that operate in the national level, and you contribute to the industry. So how do you manage your career, your contribution to the country, your personal life? Give us some techniques that you use.
It's tough. I'll tell you, it's so I'll be very candid. I've gone through depression. I've had clinical depression, right? And I think one of the best things that have happened to me, right? It's I don't wish it to end my worst enemy, having gone through it. It's a very dark, daunting thing. But when you've gone through and you come out of it, it's phenomenal. It gives you such a sense of peace of mind and clarity about what's around you, that you really feel kind of, I guess, what's the word? Just, enlightened in a lot of how you want to go about stuff, right? And I think, and I share that because I think in today's day and age, a lot of us are silently going through it, right? And it's viewed upon, mental health is viewed as a disease that no one's able to talk about, right? No one ever questions if someone has cancer, right? We give a love and say, oh my God, we feel sorry for the person, and we never go and say, oh, you have cancer, God, Chan, don't talk to the guy, right? What's wrong? We don't ask, how did you get cancer, right? We don't say, Ruwindhu, no, you live a great life, you have a blessed family, you have amazing children, you were at Virtusa, you had all that great stuff. How dare you get cancer? We never ask that. Had I got cancer, right? When I got depression, and I was lucky and blessed enough that those who were closest to me never asked that question and never felt that way. But I know for a lot of people, that would, and you and I also would do that, right? We may not voice it, but in our minds we're thinking, how can that person go to depression? What not? Because we have created in our minds reasons or rationales that warrant for someone to go to depression, right? These are all perceptions that we've created. There is no answer. It's a very personal thing, and each of us go through different things, right? So I want to share that because I think I truly believe in this, having gone through that and having been able to come out of it. It takes a lot of loved ones to have a lot of understanding, and it takes a lot of personal conviction, right? And I think a lot in that, I think, ties into also my ability to kind of, and I do like to think I live life larger than what it is, and it comes from just that inner peace, right? So how do you create that for yourself? I think it's a daily, you've got to work at it, like everything else. And we don't invest in ourselves as much, right? You think about, and that's the irony of it, right? When you're paid to do something, Nidhi Marakana, you'll do that, you'll get MBAs, you'll get MSCs, and you'll do whatever it is for something that's so fickle. But when it's your life, how many of us truly work on ourselves, on our mental health, right? On just having clarity. So you've got to view it in the same way. You've got to tell yourself that you deserve it, and you've got to work at it, right? So for me, what's worked is just that. Each person will find their own, right? For me, swimming has been it. So I swim, and that helped me during that period as well, because it was a forced mechanism of meditation. It's also the 2080, right? If you think about what happens in swimming, and you guys swim by chance?
Casually.
Casually, yeah. So I could barely swim 2 lengths without panting my life off, right? But I said no, and I put a goal. I said I'm going to want to swim 50 lengths in 35 minutes. That was my goal, right? And that still isn't great, but for me that seemed like a daunting task that I'll never do, right? To do 50 seemed absurd, and I also put a timing target because I wanted to be efficient. So first goal was to put that in, right? So you have mini victories now. So you have a goal. You need to have something that kind of gives you a sense of achievement. And it's amazing what the mind does, right? So now, as you did that, one of the biggest things was mentally 50 seemed huge. Right? After the few, it just became really tough. So I said, you know what, it's in the mind. So I started, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's how you do 50, right? So I just, simple thing that I did. I said, I'm going to count 1 as up and down. 1, 2, 3. All of a sudden, all I had to do is 25, not 50. Now, so it's a mind fake.
Yeah.
But a very important mind fake, right? Because now, unconsciously your mind has such an impact on what you do and your whole body chemistry and then how you operate on stuff. And now we have the power though. We have the power to choose how I count. I had the power. So I did that to myself. And the next thing was you focused on the 28, right? In swimming, I found the biggest thing is breathing. Because if you just think of it as walking, you don't worry about walking 5 kilometers. You can pace it out. The biggest issue for people in swimming is that they don't breathe, they fear, so they don't take enough oxygen. Your whole body function goes down, your muscles don't work. So it's a chemical process, right? So as long as you realize that and you focus on the worthy, you focus on the most important thing, your body starts reacting. So, and I share that because I think for all of us it's the same thing. You need to find your own thing, but I think finding something outside of your day-to-day, your profession, or what you're tasked or what you're paid to do, but then really trying to live life with meaning in that context and try to kind of figure out, because that same analogy now works to me in office. It works to me with my wife and my kids. Just, you can, but it's very practical, right? I know I've got to now 50 lengths in even better than 35. I can do it 33, right? And you start making stuff, right? I was lucky enough, I took part in Ironman, not the whole thing, but last year my brother-in-law was cycling. He convinced me to come and be part of the team. So every day, so I actually did the 2-mile swim or 2-kilometer swim on that first leg. And you just, you push yourself beyond things that you ever thought that you can do, right? So and that's my advice. I think for all of us is finding, and each of us do, I'm sure all of you guys have your own thing, and that's how humans are, but what I've learned is to do it more consciously. I think we don't give enough priority to that. We let that be, or I'm too busy, or I had a week. Let's be honest, there is no such thing called, and I'll share another thing, right? So we say, let's manage time. Because in time management courses, how stupid is that really? Can you manage time? You can't. No, tell me anyone who's been able to get a minute more than 24 hours? That's static. You can't manage time, right? It's a phrase, but it's a very incorrect phrase. And I think therein lies the problem, because a lot of us are led to believe that you can manage time. You can't. All you can manage is yourself. You can manage your energy, and you can manage your choice. That's all you can do. Two things that you all can do is to decide what am I going to do in the next minute, right? So do this interview versus something else. It's a choice, right? The energy that I bring to this is also a choice. I can be lackadaisical and I can say, oh, I'm going to do it for the sake of it, or I can say, I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to pump myself up and I do it with purpose. Those are the only two things that are really in your control, right? So if you kind of find, and then that's why I said by finding something that's outside of work to relate to. Swimming was an example for me. So that was a classic thing of, it was a choice of what I chose to do and the energy that I bring to it. Okay. Long-winded answer.
So can you name a person who had a tremendous impact in your professional and personal life, and then how that person went about having that impact in your life?
Sure. I mean, I guess personal hobbies, as I said, right? I mean, my mom, played a phenomenal role and still continues to play a great role. And then my wife, obviously, right? So I think, and that's probably true for all of us, but I think, in particular when I went through depression, through my ups and downs, my crazy idiosyncrasies, and it's a very important thing that those relationships we cherish, right? And then you invest into that. So those two for sure. And from a professional perspective, the person that stands out is Keith, right? I was just blessed and lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with him, Keith Moder, who I joined with KBSL, is now heading global operations of Virtusa. And just, I think, a transformational experience, having had the opportunity to work with him, right? Just as an individual, as a friend, as a mentor. And I still recall, even as I was working through, and he's part of that. When in early days, I was in my, early 20s, I joined, working like the beauty of Virtusa those days was you were never asked to do anything, you did it. It was very similar, right? It was just a passion that you kind of got into. And he'll note that I was really killing it, right? Going after crazy nights, doing that. And he'll always, and not just with me, a lot of other people, he was lucky enough that I was at the time, but he would invest that personal time. And I remember he'd one day he took me and Purani out, him and his wife Chuti, took us out, and he showed by example, and he told me, he said, Ruwindhu, I've gone through the same stuff, man, I'll tell you one thing, he told this one-on-one, he said, never sacrifice home. For you to be your best, you've got to invest at home, right? And he'll do little things like where he'll make sure that he gave you a weekend out, right? If it was crazy. It wasn't about spending more, it wasn't about giving you a bonus or more money. He'd make sure that it was about, hey, take Purani out, I want you to go spend the night out, I want you to go do something else, right? So which made sure that investment was made back into where it mattered, because that's your trust stone, right? When you go home, you need to be able to be vulnerable, you need to be yourself, you need to be able to re-energize. So yeah, I think to me, he still continues to be a great mentor. I always go back to him every time I have anything in life that I want to kind of recharge myself. So yeah, he stands out.
Alright, thanks. And yeah. Yeah, so final question, Ruwindhu. What advice do you have for this class of MBA students and future leaders of Sri Lanka, maybe?
Sure.
As to what sort of advice do you have?
Sure. I don't want to be presumptuous enough to say that I can advise you guys. You guys seem phenomenal. You're going to change the world, and I look forward to having guys like you really kind of run the country. I'll just share. I think again a choice, right? And this whole thing about choices is really important, right? And I forget where I picked this up from, but it's stuck with me. It's really the most important choice as a human for us is to either be the author or to be an actor. It really boils down to that, right? So you can either be the author of your own script and say, I'm going to write my story, I'm going to take charge, and I'm going to narrate what my story is going to be. And if you don't do that, you end up being enacting someone else's script. It's very simple. And I think for 99% of the people, unfortunately, they haven't given themselves that choice. So as a consequence, they're acting someone else's play. They're an actor, they're sometimes the main role, sometimes the villain, sometimes the sidekick, but it's not their script, right? And then I think if each of us start telling that to ourselves and giving ourselves the right to choose, that you can be the actor, I think the world will be a much better place. So,
All right.
Ivan.
Anyway, thanks a lot
Thanks,
for
Mike.
sharing.
Appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.